She dropped her husband off at a county morgue with $40 folded into his palm and 4 words, "Find your own way." She was certain she was finally trading up. He stood there in his scrubs, watching her taillights vanish into the rain. 6 minutes later, 6 black cars turned into that same lot. When the first door opened, even he didn't understand, not until he saw who stepped out. Some people marry a uniform and never once ask who's wearing it underneath. She thought she knew exactly what she was leaving behind that morning, and the world only found out what she'd actually thrown away after it was already gone. Stay with me to the end of this one, because by the time those 6 cars emptied out on Callahan Street, everyone standing in that parking lot understood they'd spent years underestimating the wrong man. If you are new here, kindly hit that subscribe button right now. The rain came down thin and steady over the county medical examiner's building, the kind of rain that doesn't announce itself, just settles into everything. Camille pulled the car to the curb the way she parked for valets, quick and clean, already thinking about being somewhere else. Nathaniel sat with his bag between his feet, his scrubs pressed, his badge clipped where it always was. He had learned a long time ago not to fill silence that wasn't his to fill. "This is where you get out," Camille said. She didn't look at him. She was checking her reflection in the visor mirror, smoothing something that didn't need smoothing. In the passenger seat, Julian kept his sunglasses on despite the rain, despite the gray morning light that made them pointless. He didn't turn around either. He studied his phone, like the scene playing out beside him belonged to strangers. Camille reached into her purse, pulled out 2 folded 20s, and pressed them into his hand, without quite meeting his eyes. "Take it," she said. "Consider it severance." She almost laughed at her own line, the kind of thing she'd probably rehearsed in the shower, in the car, in the mirror. "You'll figure something out. You're resourceful. Find your own way." He looked at the money in his palm a moment, then folded it once and slid it into his coat pocket, the way a man puts away a receipt he'll never need again. "All right," he said. Just that. She had wanted more. He could see it in the way her jaw tightened, the way her hand hovered near the gear shift, like she was waiting for a door to slam, a voice to break, something to justify the story she'd already written about this morning. He didn't give it to her. He stepped out into the rain, shut the door with the same care he used on everything, and stood on the sidewalk while she pulled away. He didn't watch the car go. He was already turning toward the building, already reaching for his badge. Inside, the air smelled the way it always did, bleach over something colder underneath it, a smell most people spent their whole lives never learning to sit with. A younger tech glanced up from the intake desk. "You're early," she said. "Traffic was light," Nathaniel said, and clocked in. He walked the long hallway toward the locker room the same way he had for 6 years, past the cold room doors, past the scale, past the clipboard where the day's names waited in someone else's handwriting. He didn't think about the $20 bills folded in his pocket. He didn't think about the sound of tires on wet pavement fading behind him. He thought about the next name on the clipboard and the dignity it was owed, and got to work. Augustin Cole never once let his son call him rich. He would say it plainly, over breakfast, over the sound of the radio he kept tuned to nothing but weather and grain prices. "We have money, Nathaniel. That's a fact about a bank. It is not a fact about you." Then he'd go back to his eggs like the matter was closed, and it usually was, because Augustin didn't repeat himself. He said a thing once and let a boy grow into it. They lived plainly for men who didn't have to. A brick house with a good roof and nothing showy about it. A car that ran fine and looked like every other car on the block. Nathaniel didn't learn what his father's company actually was until he was nearly grown, and by then, the lesson underneath it had already taken root so deep it didn't matter. The lesson started the summer Nathaniel turned 16, when Augustin drove him to a squat brick building on the edge of town, with a sign that just said county, nothing else, and told him to get out of the car. "What is this?" Nathaniel asked. "Where you're spending your summer." Inside, a tired man in a lab coat named Everett showed him how to file, how to catalog, how to stand quietly at the edge of a room while something solemn happened in it. Nathaniel gagged the first week. He got used to it by the third. "Why here?" he finally asked his father, one evening in the car, still smelling faintly of the building, no matter how long he'd washed his hands. Augustin didn't answer right away. He watched the road a while. "Because, in that building," he said, "a senator and a man who slept under a bridge end up on the same table, with the same clipboard and the same clean sheet. Nobody in there gets more dignity than anybody else. That's the only ledger I've ever trusted, son, the one that doesn't care what you wore, who you knew, or what your name opened." "That's morbid," Nathaniel said, 16 and unimpressed. "It's honest," Augustin said. "Most places lie to you about what a person's worth. That building never will. You learn to see people straight in there, you'll see them straight everywhere else too." Nathaniel didn't understand it then, not fully. He understood the smell, the paperwork, the long, quiet hours. He understood his father wanted him to sweat for something before he was ever told what waited behind it. It would be years before he understood that his father hadn't just been teaching him a trade. He'd been teaching him how to recognize the difference between people who valued him and people who valued what he could open for them. He just hadn't known yet how long that lesson would take to matter. The night Nathaniel started full-time at the morgue, Augustin drove him himself, though by then his son had a car of his own and no need of a ride. They sat in the parking lot a while before Nathaniel went in, the engine ticking as it cooled, the building's one lit window throwing a pale square onto the wet asphalt. "You don't have to do this," Augustin said. "Whatever you think you owe this family, it isn't a job title." "I want to," Nathaniel said, and meant it. Somewhere in those teenage summers, the smell had stopped being the thing he noticed first. What he noticed now was the quiet, how the dead asked nothing of him, how nobody in that building had ever once looked at him and calculated what he was worth to know. Augustin studied him a long moment, the way a man looks at a house he built and is only now seeing finished. Then he reached into his coat and set something small and heavy in his son's palm. A watch. Plain steel, no shine to it. The kind of thing you could wear into a mortuary or a boardroom, and no one would look at it twice. "For tonight," Augustin said. Nathaniel turned it over. The back plate was sealed, no hinge or clasp visible, just a smooth, unbroken circle of metal. "It doesn't open." "It opens," Augustin said. "There's a catch, if you know where to press. But I'm not going to show you tonight." "Why not?" His father was quiet for a moment, watching the rain bead and run on the windshield. "Because right now, you don't need what's inside it. Right now you've got the mystery, and the mystery is doing its job. It's making you walk in there and become somebody on your own, without a single answer to lean on." He nodded toward the building. "One day that won't be true anymore. One day you'll need the truth more than you need the not knowing. You'll know the day. Open it then, not before." Nathaniel almost laughed. It sounded like something out of one of the old stories his father used to tell him at bedtime, riddles with morals stitched into the ending. But Augustin's face wasn't telling a story. It was the face of a man setting something down that he'd carried a long while himself. Nathaniel slid the watch onto his wrist. It fit like it had been made for exactly that moment. "Go on," Augustin said. "You'll be late." He walked in that night and clocked in for the first of what would become thousands of shifts, the watch cool against his skin, ticking quietly under his sleeve through years he never once thought to question. He wore it every day after that, through the wedding, through the quiet erosion of a marriage he didn't yet know was already ending. Through 6 years of folded 20s and closed doors, he never once pressed the catch. It started small, the way most erosions do. A pause before she introduced him at parties, half a beat too long, like she was deciding how to phrase a job title that didn't photograph well. "This is Nathaniel. He works over at the county building. Never morgue, never medical examiner, just the county building, vague enough to let people assume whatever they liked, and most of them assumed something dull and forgettable, which suited her fine. He noticed. He never said anything. At her firm's holiday party that first bad winter, a man in a good suit asked Nathaniel what he did, and when he answered plainly, no euphemism, no softening, the man's smile flickered the way smiles do when they're recalculating a person's worth in real time. "Huh," the man said. "Rough way to make a living." Camille laughed a little too quickly and steered the conversation elsewhere, and Nathaniel watched her do it and said nothing, because saying something would have meant admitting he'd noticed, and admitting he'd noticed would have meant asking her to defend him, and some part of him didn't want to find out whether she would. That same winter, Camille's sister lost her job in March and didn't find another one until October. Nathaniel found out, almost by accident, a stray comment at dinner, a mention of a landlord's patience running thin. He didn't ask Camille's permission. He didn't announce it. He simply moved money quietly every month into an account that wasn't his, covered 7 months of rent for a woman who'd never once thanked him for anything, and never told Camille he'd done it. It wasn't a secret because he wanted credit withheld. It was a secret because, somewhere along the way, he'd absorbed his father's old lesson so completely he no longer knew how to do a kindness any other way. You didn't do a good thing so it could be seen. You did it because the ledger only mattered if nobody was watching you fill it out. Camille's sister found out eventually, from the bank, and said nothing to him about it either. Just looked at him differently for a week or two, confused by a kindness she couldn't fit into what she'd already decided about him. Camille never found out at all. What she found instead was a growing list of small subtractions. A husband who worked nights while her friends' husbands closed deals in daylight. A man who came home smelling of bleach when she wanted someone who came home smelling of restaurants. She started measuring her life against rooms he wasn't invited into, and somewhere in that measuring, she stopped noticing the parts of him that had nothing to do with his paycheck at all. The steadiness, the quiet loyalty, the way he never once made her feel small for wanting more. She just kept wanting more, and stopped believing he could ever be any part of it. The hotel opening was the kind of event Camille had spent years angling to be invited to. Marble underfoot, a jazz trio nobody was listening to, waiters moving through the crowd like they'd been choreographed. She'd worn the blue dress she saved for exactly this kind of room. Julian found her near the bar, the way certain men find the one person in a room who looks like she's still deciding whether she belongs there. "You look like you're calculating something," he said. "I'm admiring the chandelier." "You're calculating something." He smiled like he'd caught her at it, and didn't mind. "I do it too. Occupational habit," he told her. He ran acquisitions for his family's hospitality group. Said it the way men say things they've said 100 times, and never tire of the effect. He asked what she did, and when she told him, he listened. Actually listened, in a way that made her realize how long it had been since someone had. "And your husband?" he asked eventually, glancing at the ring she still wore without thinking about it. "He works nights," she said. "At the county building? Doing what?" She hesitated, the old half-beat pause, and something in Julian's face read it instantly, the way a man reads a hand of cards someone else is trying not to show him. "Ah," he said, gently, like he was doing her a kindness by not making her finish the sentence. "That's not a criticism. Some people just settle into a life and stop asking whether it fits." "He's a good man," she said, too fast. "I don't doubt it." Julian turned his glass slowly, watching the light catch it. "But good and shining aren't the same thing, Camille. You can spend 6 years polishing a man like that, giving him every reason to rise to something, and eventually you have to ask yourself an honest question." He looked at her directly then, no smile in it. "What if there's no shine under there to reflect back? What if you've just been polishing steel?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He'd said the thing she'd been circling for months without ever letting herself land on it, said it out loud in a marble room with a jazz trio playing behind them, and made it sound not like a betrayal of her marriage but like an overdue correction. "I'm not telling you to leave anybody," Julian said, setting his glass down, already halfway to somewhere else in the room. I'm just saying, some women spend their whole lives waiting for a man to catch up to a life he was never built for. And some women realize the upgrade isn't cruelty. It's just honesty, finally, about what you were always worth. He left her standing there, with her drink going warm in her hand, and for the first time in a long while, Camille let herself imagine a version of her life where leaving wasn't a failure. It was simply, finally, moving on to where she belonged. Delphine set the roast down in the center of the table, the way she set down most things, like a verdict she'd already reached and was only now announcing. Nathaniel wasn't there. He was working the overnight, the way he was most Sundays, and his absence sat at the table like an invited guest nobody had bothered to seat. "I ran into Marjorie's daughter at the market," Delphine said, passing the potatoes without looking up. "Married a cardiologist. They just closed on a house in the hills." She let that settle before she added, almost as an afterthought, "You could have had any of them, you know. You had the looks for it. The poise, and you picked the one who spends his evenings with corpses. Mother, I'm not being cruel, Camille. I'm being honest. Somebody has to be." Delphine finally looked up, and there was no venom in her face, just a flat, tired certainty, the kind reserved for facts she considered settled long ago. "You were the prettiest girl in 3 counties, and you married a man who smells like a hospital hallway. I've held my tongue about it for 6 years because I raised you to make your own choices, but choices have consequences, and I watch you shrink a little more every time I see you." Camille's fork sat untouched on her plate. A year ago she would have argued. 2 years ago she might have left the table. Tonight she just turned her water glass slowly in a circle, watching the light bend through it, and said nothing. Her sister glanced between them, waiting for the defense that always used to come, the reflexive, "He's a good man," mother, that had worn a groove into every one of these dinners. It didn't come. Delphine noticed the silence too. She set her own fork down, and for the first time all evening, something like surprise crossed her face. "Well," she said slowly, "look at that. It's not that simple," Camille finally said, quiet, not quite meeting anyone's eyes. "It's exactly that simple," Delphine said, gentler now, sensing the door she'd been pushing against for years finally give. "You just needed enough evenings alone to see it for yourself." She reached over and patted her daughter's hand, the way she used to when Camille was small and had scraped a knee. "There's no shame in outgrowing a decision you made young. The shame is staying in it once you already know better." Camille didn't cry. She didn't defend him, and she didn't defend herself either. She just sat there, letting her mother's verdict settle over the table like something final, something that had been waiting a long time to be spoken aloud, in a room he wasn't in to hear it. Later, driving home past the county building with its one lit window glowing faint through the dark, she didn't slow down. She didn't look at it at all. He came home early that night, an autopsy postponed, a rare gap in a schedule that never usually gave him one. He didn't call ahead. 6 years of marriage hadn't taught him he needed to. He heard her voice through the kitchen door before he saw her, low and warm, in a register he hadn't heard aimed at him in longer than he wanted to count. I know, I just need to figure out the timing. It's not that simple. There's the house, there's..." A pause, a soft laugh, the kind that used to be his. "No, he won't fight it. That's not who he is. He'll probably just let it happen. That's kind of the problem, Julian. He lets everything happen." Nathaniel stood in the hallway, with his coat still on, keys still in his hand, and didn't move. "I keep thinking about what my mother said," Camille went on. "That I've been shrinking. And she's right. I have. I just didn't know how to say it out loud until somebody else said it first." Another pause. Longer. "I don't want to hurt him. I don't. I just don't think I love him, the way you're supposed to love someone you're planning a whole life with. I think I loved the idea that he'd never ask for more than I gave him. That's not the same thing." The watch on his wrist ticked against the doorframe as his hand tightened, faint and steady, the only sound in the hall besides her voice. He thought about walking in. He thought about the exact words he might say. 6 years, Camille. 6 years and I never once. And how they'd sound aloud, whether they'd land as hurt or as accusation, whether either one would matter to a woman already halfway out a door she hadn't opened yet. He thought about his father, all those years ago in the car outside the morgue. And you learn to see people straight in there, you'll see them straight everywhere else too. He had seen this coming for months. He'd simply chosen not to look directly at it, the same way he'd learned not to fill silence that wasn't his to fill. That silence had always felt like strength to him, a discipline, a kind of dignity his father had built into him one summer at a time. Standing in his own hallway, listening to his wife plan a future that didn't include him, he understood for the first time that the same silence could be something else entirely. It could be surrender, dressed up to look like grace. He set his keys down without a sound. He didn't open the kitchen door. He walked back out into the night, the way he'd walked into 100 quiet rooms full of people who couldn't speak for themselves. And for the first time in his life, that comparison didn't comfort him at all. He drove back to the one place that had never once asked anything of him he couldn't give. The rain hadn't let up when Camille pulled back onto the block, 6 minutes after she'd driven away from it. She'd told herself she just needed her phone charger, left behind in the console, a thin excuse she hadn't examined too closely. Julian didn't ask why they were circling back. They were still idling at the far end of the lot, engine running, when the first black car turned in. Nathaniel had just stepped back outside for the changeover between shifts when he saw it. Then a second car, then 4 more behind it, moving in a slow, deliberate line, filling the wet asphalt from curb to curb. Co-workers drifted out the front doors to see what the commotion was. A tech with her phone already raised, 2 men in scrubs pausing mid-conversation, a woman from records pressing a hand to her mouth without knowing yet why she should. The doors opened together, unhurried, the way doors open for people who have never once needed to rush. An older man in a grey suit stepped out first, a leather folio under his arm, his eyes finding Nathaniel immediately and staying there. "Mr. Cole," he said. The name landed strangely in that parking lot, unfamiliar to everyone standing in it, except the one man it belonged to. "Cole?" someone murmured. The older man crossed to him and did not extend a hand first. He bowed his head, slightly, the way a man does when the news he's carrying deserves that much before anything else. "I'm sorry to find you at work," he said. "Your father passed early this morning, peacefully, in his sleep." He asked, near the end, that we come to you directly. No delays, no formalities. He was very specific about that. Nathaniel didn't move. Somewhere behind him, he heard a phone shift in someone's hand, the small mechanical click of a camera, deciding this moment was worth keeping. "There is a great deal to explain," the attorney continued, quieter now, for him alone. "But the essential fact is this. You are the sole heir to Cole Holdings, effective immediately, in full, exactly as he instructed years ago and never once amended." Down the block, Camille's car still hadn't moved. Through the windshield, distance blurring the details, she watched 6 men in dark suits form a loose half-circle around the husband she'd left on that curb 6 minutes earlier, on the sidewalk of a building she'd never once let herself learn the real name of. She didn't understand yet, not fully, but something in the stillness of the scene, the weight of it, the way strangers were already lifting their phones toward him, told her whatever she was watching was not small. Nathaniel's hand drifted to the watch at his wrist. He could feel, for the first time, exactly where the catch was. He didn't press it. Not here, not with a dozen phones aimed at his face, and his father's name still hanging unfamiliar in the wet air. Whatever was inside it, it hadn't been made for a parking lot. It could wait for a quiet table. The story moved faster than any of them expected. By evening, it had a name attached to a company most people only half recognized, until someone explained what it owned. Hotels, holdings, a private fortune that had spent decades staying deliberately out of headlines. By the next morning, it had a face, and the face was the man half of Julian's own hotel group had spent that opening night calling the husband. Julian's family distanced themselves within the week, the way families do when a story turns from an asset into a liability. Deals quietly stalled. Invitations quietly stopped. He was last seen, by anyone who cared to look, standing alone at the edge of a groundbreaking ceremony nobody important attended, his sunglasses on despite the overcast sky, as if the habit had simply outlived its purpose. Delphine fared worse in her own circle than she ever had in her daughter's marriage. The women who'd nodded along at her dinner table verdicts stopped returning calls once the verdict was revealed to have been about the wrong man entirely. She sent Nathaniel one message weeks later that he never answered. Camille came to the morgue once more, 3 weeks after the 6 cars. He was outside again, in his father's tailored blue now instead of scrubs, when her car pulled to the same curb. She got out before it had fully stopped, and by the time she reached him, she was already on her knees on the wet pavement, the posture arriving before the words did. "Nathaniel, please. I didn't know. I would never have." He didn't raise his voice. He reached into his coat, the way he had that first morning, and counted out 2 folded 20s into her open, shaking hands. "Consider it severance," he said, quiet, without cruelty, and turned back toward the building while a dozen phones held the moment steady around them. That night, alone in the house that had once been theirs, he sat at the kitchen table with the watch finally off his wrist for the first time in years. He pressed the catch his father had shown him where to find, and the backplate gave way with a small, patient click, like it had been waiting exactly this long to be understood. Inside, in his father's careful hand, engraved into the steel, "Whatever they take from you, they can never take who taught you to give. Come back to the table when you're ready. There's always room at it for someone who never once needed to be told to be decent." Nathaniel sat with that a long while. He didn't quit the morgue. He kept his badge, kept a locker there, and returned some nights not because he had to, but because that building had taught him who he was before anyone had told him who he could become. He'd learned the ledger young. He wasn't about to stop reading from it now. Thank you for watching.